Welcome to the debate. Today, we turn our attention to one of the defining corporate entities of the last 50 years, Nike. This is a company that has become a global force, a symbol of high-performance athletics, market domination, and, inevitably, deep ethical controversy. I mean, its influence is just so broad. It touches everything from, elite sport to cultural philosophy. So a simple positive or negative evaluation is almost impossible.
Indeed. And I think Nike's narrative it's a profound case study in corporate contradiction. The sheer scale of its economic and cultural reach demands that we look beyond the marketing. So the central question really is this: does Nike's immense global influence ultimately represent a net positive force for humanity and sport? Or is its impact, fundamentally problematic, rooted in these persistent ethical gaps and cultural simplification?
I will be presenting the argument that, when weighing the evidence, Nike's record of continuous technological innovation, its powerful messaging of self-empowerment, and its successful corporate turnaround defines an overall net positive influence that has actively raised industry standards.
And I will argue that we have to focus on the consequences of its overwhelming market dominance, the persistent ethical issues, the cultural critiques surrounding its core messaging, and, well, the quest for competitive advantage at all cost demonstrate a legacy that is far more problematic and complex than any corporate social responsibility report can solve.
Let's begin with the quantifiable positive influence in the arena where Nike built its name: performance. Nike's influence is defined by continuous, aggressive innovation that genuinely pushes the limits of human performance. The prime example, of course, is the Vaporfly technology. This is not anecdotal improvement. I mean, peer-reviewed research, notably randomized crossover studies, has demonstrated that this line of footwear provides a measurable 4% improvement in running economy. To put that in context, a 4% improvement in economy can translate to a significant time reduction over marathon distances, making the sub-2-hour marathon feat not just plausible but attainable. This is a fundamental positive disruption that redefines what the human body can achieve in competitive sport.
The innovation is certainly visible, but I struggle to accept that innovation at the expense of fairness and material reality can be labeled a net positive. To shift focus slightly, let's look at the foundational narrative of the brand. The very core philosophy you find so positive, the Just Do It slogan, is based on, ethically questionable origins. It was inspired by the final words of the convicted murderer Gary Gilmore, "Let's do it." Co-opting a moment of existential finality and turning it into an advertising imperative, it just injects a degree of cynical manipulation into the very concept of the brand. This sets the stage for a problematic cultural entanglement right from the start.
Look, that origin story, while provocative, I think is less important than the power of the successful recontextualization. Nike managed to pivot that phrasing and establish a powerful, unifying philosophy of self-empowerment and overcoming perceived limitations. Scholars looking at the psychology of the brand have noted that this campaign successfully supports a deeply American notion of individualism and vitalism. The belief that one can, through sheer will and action, command one's life to be different. This isn't just selling shoes, it's selling a philosophy. We saw this vitalism used effectively in powerful campaigns with figures like Serena Williams, but most crucially, in the controversial decision to feature Colin Kaepernick. That decision aligned the brand with genuine social boldness and the defiance of powerful expectations, validating the sincerity of the message.
I have to disagree with the premise that inspirational advertising outweighs the systemic issues underpinning the entire production model. Neo-Marxian critics have pointed out that the self-empowerment message is inherently misleading because it ignores the social and material relations that structure and delimit life chances. And that gap, that chasm between rhetoric and reality, is glaringly evident in the reports from the 90s, where Indonesian factory workers like Sedisa were earning $37.46 a month, an income well below what is considered a living wage. How can you market self-determination when the material conditions for your own labor force deny them that very chance?
And that brings us directly to the critical inflection point of the late 90s and 2000s, which I think is evidence of a corporation using its power for positive change.
The immense global pressure you cite led Nike to demonstrate a willingness to undertake significant, even industry-leading corporate social responsibility or CSR reforms. This was a profound turnaround, shifting its reputation from an ethical laggard to leader. Former CEO Phil Knight's 1998 speech acknowledged the problems publicly, and the company then took concrete, unprecedented steps, publishing a full list of contract factories, moving toward independent third-party monitoring, and implementing a code of conduct based on International Labor Organization standards. This proactive transparency, what some call Transparency 101, was revolutionary at the time and proved that a large corporation can respond to systemic pressure and use its scale to mandate positive improvements across its supply chain.
I'm not convinced by the narrative of inherent corporate virtue or proactive change. The reforms were catalyzed by global crisis and sustained NGO pressure, not some internal moral awakening. And despite those early reforms, labor issues persist. I mean, as recently as 2017, Nike received a bottom score on a scale measuring ethics in the fashion industry, related specifically to implementing a living wage. Furthermore, the immense economic leverage Nike exerts in countries like Vietnam, where its production accounted for 5% of the entire country's GDP in 1999, created an environment where local regulation was extremely difficult to enforce. This economic sway led to persistent worker abuse and environmental violations at facilities like the Tae Kwang Vina factory, which really illustrates that the structural power imbalance remains largely unaddressed by CSR reports.
Okay, let's deepen the conflict by returning to athletics and focus specifically on the Vaporfly technology and the boundaries of fair competition.
A necessary discussion. I understand why you see Vaporfly as the pinnacle of positive innovation, but I see it as a disruption that violated the established spirit of athletic fairness.
But the shoe is a clear positive because it drives the entire sector forward. Yes, it confers a significant advantage, but that advantage comes from the shoe's sophisticated engineering, the carbon plate, the new foam, working synergistically with the runner's own biomechanics. It is not an unfair mechanical aid. World Athletics examined this thoroughly and ultimately affirmed the legality of the Vaporfly Next% by implementing a specific regulatory framework, the 40mm sole thickness limit, a restriction on the number of plates. This contrasts sharply with cases like the banned Speedo LZ Eraser swimsuit, which was a clear technological boost separate from the athlete's body. Nike pushed the boundaries and regulation adapted. That's the definition of healthy progress in professional sports.
The fact that regulation had to adapt is precisely my point. The adaptation was forced because the shoe created an undeniable, measurable, and immediate advantage that fundamentally changed the competition. We had never before seen regulation dictated by a single product's performance. This led to uncomfortable accusations of technological doping, which damages the integrity of the sport. Beyond that, the innovation wasn't accessible. The high cost, coupled with manufactured scarcity, initially pushed the resale market for these shoes to as much as $1,000. This directly violated the spirit of the rule that competitive equipment must be reasonably available to all. Nike's innovation prioritized performance gains and market exclusivity over fairness, which shifts foot racing from a test of human endurance to a test of access to elite, expensive equipment.
The exclusivity of elite equipment has always been a factor in high-level sports, though I do take your point on accessibility. But let's move back to the cultural realm, specifically the debate over Just Do It. I disagree with your premise that the slogan promotes anti-intellectualism and simple, thoughtless behavior.
I believe the language itself has a real sociological impact. I mean, the simplicity and vagueness of the command are its most dangerous qualities. The adverb just scorns critical thinking and promotes impulsive behavior. It's cognitive shorthand for behavior without adequate thought. By promoting man-doing over man-thinking, the slogan is coercive. It applies intense pressure in the name of a specific, narrow standard of achievement, while systemically ignoring the complex reality that success is often limited by material or social constraints. It's a culturally convenient lie.
I would frame the ambiguity of the slogan differently. In my view, the indefinite "it" is its strength. It allows the consumer or the athlete to fill that gap with acts of genuine health, virtue, or boldness. It is effectively a modern and commercialized translation of the ancient Carpe Diem philosophy, seizing the day, spontaneous action. And this vitalism, when aligned with challenging the status quo, is a powerful social force. The Kaepernick campaign is the best evidence of this.
The Kaepernick campaign?
Yes. While risky and certainly controversial, Nike's decision to feature Kaepernick was itself a bold, visible move. They risked immediate commercial loss, and they did suffer initial stock tips to align themselves with the social movement. This validated the slogan's core message of belief and sacrifice in the face of immense public pressure. It participated in mobilizing a social movement, precisely because it transcended simple consumerism. It authenticated the philosophy of the brand.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the commercialization of social justice? The move to feature Kaepernick, while bold in the short term, quickly proved to be a brilliant calculated market strategy. It targeted a younger, socially conscious demographic and ultimately resulted in increased profits. Was that courage, or just highly effective commercial opportunism? The sincerity of the message is always in doubt when it is delivered by a corporation known for a supply chain that's often criticized for failing ethical basics. The vastness of the gap between the aspiration, be bold, change the world, and the material reality, you are still working for $2 a day in a factory controlled by our economic sway. That's the fundamental problem I have with its cultural influence.
But that critique discounts the measurable efforts made to close that gap. Let's look specifically at corporate responsibility again, which you claim is driven purely by crisis. The evidence shows that intellectual disagreement sharpens understanding, and Nike internalized that pressure and used its structure for good. The move to Transparency 101 established new industry standards that force competitors to follow. I returned to the Tay Quang Vinya factory in Vietnam. Following the 1997 report and the implementation of safety measures, they reduced nose and throat diseases among the workers from a crippling 86% down to 18% in a single year. That is empirical, documented evidence that the corporate structure, when leveraged, can enforce massive positive health and safety changes, which subsequently pressured others like Adidas and Puma to raise their bar. This is a net positive outcome for global labor standards.
I come at it from a different perspective. While the improvements you cite are real, and yes, they should be acknowledged, they are the bare minimum of human decency, not evidence of a successful ethical model. You are right that the Tay Quang Vina case demonstrates the extreme difficulty of regulating subcontractors, but it also highlights how Nike's economic power held sway over local officials. Workers were subject to forced overtime, verbal abuse, toxic exposure, not because Nike necessarily wanted that, but because the relentless pressure for competitive cost advantages trickled down to the point of abuse. And crucially, while conditions improved, the systemic wage issue remains. The fact that Nike, even after decades of reform, still scored poorly on implementing a living wage shows that the profit imperative inevitably overrides the ethical imperative.
But doesn't the sheer scale of the turnaround, moving from a global pariah to a benchmark for industry transparency, demonstrate a fundamental capacity for positive influence? They set the standards that the entire sector now attempts to meet.
Only because they were forced to. The brand's rhetoric still dictates an imperative for individual action and success, while their supply chain dictates a much darker imperative for the factory worker. Just do what you are told, no matter how unpleasant or underpaid. That internal contradiction is the defining feature of Nike's problematic legacy.
Nike's story is undeniably messy, filled with contradictions, but its lasting influence is ultimately about motion. It forces both the athletic world and the corporate responsibility landscape to confront limits and strive for higher standards. The brand's capacity to drive innovation, successfully recover from a severe reputational disaster, and continue engaging meaningfully in cultural dialogue, it suggests a persistent, powerful, positive capacity that has shaped global expectations for both performance and corporate transparency.
That's a compelling argument, but the evidence shows complexity often requires multiple perspectives to fully appreciate. Nike remains a brand defined by its internal contradictions, a brand that inspires the elite athlete with profound technological advantage while simultaneously presiding over a supply chain continuously scrutinized for failing basic ethical responsibilities. We must continuously question the vast and often harmful gap between the powerful rhetoric of just do it and the actual material conditions it supports globally.
The story of Nike demonstrates that a single massive global company inherently struggles to reconcile the demands of performance innovation and cultural empowerment with the persistent challenge of ethical responsibility in a high-pressured, globalized economy.
There is clearly more to explore in this material.